It's time now to take a deeper look at the situation in Iraq. Over the last week, fighters from the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, have seized control of huge parts of northern Iraq. This map shows the area now in control. We begin our in-depth look with this report from Courtney Keeley.
Fighters from ISIL, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, seized tons of military equipment and hundreds of millions of dollars in cash this week when they took Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. Now their sights are set on Baghdad.
This is definitely not a surprise.
Steve Cook says the group's roots lie among Sunni Muslim foreigners who came to Syria to fight Bashar al-Assad's regime, which is led by Shiites. Now those fighters have turned their sights on another Shiite-led government, the one in neighboring Iraq. Already in control of a portion of eastern Syria, ISIL moved into Iraq's Anbar province last winter.
They've been building for quite some time, are now clearly getting to the point where they are ripping the country apart.
At Friday prayers in the holy city of Karbala, the highest religious authority for Iraq Shia, Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, issued a statement through his spokesman and called on every able-bodied Iraqi man to fight back against ISIL. Government forces collapsed when ISIL attacked Mosul. Douglas Ollivant is a former U.S. Army officer and advisor on Iraq. He says that as the fight moves towards Baghdad, the Iraqi army will be able to count on support from Shia militias and perhaps even Iran's Revolutionary Guards.
What the Iraqis do not have is any semblance of air power that they can use. No attack helicopters, no jet fighters, nothing like that to support them.
President Barack Obama has ruled out sending U.S. troops back into combat, but as the Pentagon continues to weigh its options, the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush, one of the largest warships in the world, with a crew of about 6,000, has been moved nearby into the Arabian Gulf. But Ollivant believes even that may be too little, too late.
Clearly this White House has ignored Iraq, doesn't want to deal with it, wants to pretend that it doesn't exist, has not engaged with it. I think that's been a real problem in that Iraq has simply not been something this administration wanted to deal with.
Fears that the country might fracture along ethnic and sectarian lines have long haunted U.S. policymakers. But more than 2 years after the last American combat troops came home, the U.S. has few options if the country plunges into civil war for the second time in a decade. Courtney Keeley, Al-Jazeera.
This is a fluid situation. To discuss more about the new developments inside Iraq, we're joined by Jim Walsh from Boston. He's a research associate at MIT. And here in the studio, Adeeb Al-Naimi, who is a former Baghdad bureau chief for the New York Times. Good to have you with us, gentlemen. As we look at the situation, as we look at the insurgents, what are we up against? How powerful are these insurgents, Ali?
Apparently they are. They are pretty powerful. I mean, they have taken advantage of the resentment by Sunnis in Iraq against Maliki's government, and they are cooperating now with local insurgents in the cities that they have taken control of. So they're getting really stronger than when they first moved in. And I think if the retaliation or any action against them is going to take longer, they will gain more and more ground.
They're gaining more ground. Are you surprised by the support they're getting in Mosul?
To some point, yes, but when I was talking to friends in Mosul and just getting more feedback from them about the latest developments in the city, I began to understand that the big picture of what was happening. First of all, for the past 2 years, the people of Mosul have been under a lot of pressure from Maliki's government, and they've been looked at as suspects all the time. Pressure by the security forces and the military in the city, and now it's their chance to get rid of all of this, feeling that they are again the owners or the leaders of their city. Of course, I'm not saying that the insurgents will give them that. It's just the sort of the reflection, the first moment reaction, the first few days, but later on when they feel that those insurgents have came to implement their own view of Sharia and to see what all the atrocities that were happening and actually happening right now in Syria will happen again in Mosul. I think this will change. But right now, yes, they are gaining ground and they're getting some support from the people.
Once again, Jim Walsh is joining us. Jim, how does Syria factor into all of this?
Well, I think it factors in insofar as what you have is a mobile group of extremists, Sunni extremists, who can go from one conflict to a second conflict to a third conflict, whichever seems most promising. And so we've seen them move into Iraq and advance forward. I'm a little more cautious about the prospects of this. They've expanded quickly, but they haven't really faced any resistance until today. A lot of those Iraqi troops that shed their uniforms and joined the other side were Sunnis. I think that this is a majority Shia state, and with the Ayatollah Sistani calling for mass resistance, it seems unlikely to me that this group is going to achieve their objective. What is their objective? To destroy the Shia shrines. It seems to me people are going to fight pretty hard to keep that from happening. So they've enjoyed some successes. They've probably got a bunch of money and arms as they've expanded. But as they expand, that's more territory to cover. I do not expect them to be able to be victorious. But, Thomas, I have to say here, though, are they going to be pushed back? Yes. But this happening bodes ill for the future.
But also bodes ill for the Prime Minister. This is a rebellion against the Prime Minister and how he's handling the situation. You mentioned the troops there simply taking off their uniform and fleeing.
Absolutely, Thomas. I mean, I think this was a huge mistake. And you can see why President Obama was reluctant to embrace Maliki. He did not sign the U.S. forces agreement. He has played the Shia card in order to hold his political consensus and to be able to hold on to power. And now this is, you sow what you reap, or reap what you sow, rather. And so the fact that they've oppressed Sunni minorities has helped create conditions that have allowed these Sunni extremists to flourish. But at the end of the day, they're going to be pushed back. The problem, Thomas, I think, though, is when they do push back and you have Shia militias, it's not going to be a very pretty scene when they try to retake those cities. And this is going to further feed sectarian violence. This is really creating a situation in which this is becoming a Sunni Shia war, and that can be an infectious and contagious disease, as we've seen in Syria, and it could spread to Iraq and elsewhere. So in the short term, I think they can push it back. In the long term, this does not look good.
Adeeb, what does this mean for Baghdad as they gain ground?
I don't think they will get to Baghdad. It's too much for them. I mean, they got their momentum in the first few days. They got Mosul, and that was a huge victory for them. They moved to parts of Kirkuk. They reached Salahuddin Tikrit, the hometown of Saddam. But so far, they haven't been able to get to Samarra, where the shrines are. I don't think they're spreading thin. I don't think they can reach Baghdad. Baghdad is a totally different story, demographically speaking, and from all aspects. Baghdad has a Shia majority there. So it's going to be a huge fight there.
Looking at this from Western eyes, why should we sit up and take notice?
Well, you have an issue in the region. First of all, you have Syria. This will affect Syria a lot. They are getting a lot of they got the money, they got military equipment from Iraq, and if they gain ground and they establish their own, say, living state in Mosul and a couple of towns around it, it's going to be even harder to push them back, and Iran's going to get more leverage in Iraq. The government in Baghdad will see that they have no ally except the Iranians to help them. If the U.S. does not step in, then the whole thing is going to be even more complicated.
If the U.S. doesn't step in, Jim, let's talk about the options that are on the table and the options that President Obama is weighing now. What can it do? What will it do?
I really wonder about that. There's no zest or enthusiasm for getting involved in Iraq. Again, because I think the problems are homegrown. This isn't, a function of Obama weakness or some other reason. These problems flow directly from the way Maliki has governed, playing the sectarian card, which is coming back to haunt him. I think this is an area where actually Iran and the U.S. share an interest. We both support a stability in Iraq. We both want the Shia government of Maliki to succeed, but succeed without persecuting Sunnis. What can we do? Folks have talked about training. At this point, when the battle is engaged, it's a little late to be doing training. The Iranians are reluctant to put boots on the ground. ground. We're reluctant to put boots on the ground for obvious good reasons. You know, I don't know where this is going. And by the way, Thomas, while this is all happening, of course, the Kurds are taking, understandably, are taking this as an opportunity to grab a piece of territory. And the Iraqis are not going to want to fight a two-front war against Sunni extremists and against Kurds. But if the Kurds are successful, then that raises the possibility that Turkey will become involved. So you know, for those of us who worry about the region, we worry most about a contagious sectarian war. We have that in Syria. It is now in Iraq. And I don't think there are a lot of good options here.
So we're saying no to American troops on the ground, possibly U.S. airstrikes. What do you make of the carrier being repositioned?
Well, I think it makes good sense. I think it's a prudent move because it gives the president options. Now, you know, a carrier is, sometimes it's just symbolic. You know, it can shoot off some missiles and do a little of that and do a little of this. But it's not going to sort of turn the tide or really change the fundamentals on the ground. It does give the president options. I think the fact that there are Americans in Iraq that we should protect, it helps with that. But I think it's not going to make a big difference at the end of the day. But having resources, shifting assets closer, does give the president more options should this thing go bad really, really quickly.
Ali, what do you make of the possibility that Iran may get involved?
I don't think Iran is going to get involved with boots on the ground. They're not going to get in. It's sectarian enough by now. If Iran gets involved, it's going to be a totally different scene there, and it's going to get even more complicated. So Iran maybe will send some aid to Iraq, maybe will send some advisors, give some sort of aid to the government, but I don't think they will send troops right now. Iran is interested in having a stable Iraq, yes. Iran is interested in stopping the extremists, the Sunni extremists.
What do they want to see the U.S. do?
Well, I think the Iran president was pretty clear today when he said we are ready to cooperate with the U.S. And that's sort of a rare moment where we have an intersection of interest in Iraq. And if the Americans decide to go with airstrikes, I think the Iranians will help. I don't know how, but maybe they will help the government on the ground to gain more ground from the insurgents.
Will this affect political change in Iraq?
I think so, yes. I think if the Americans decide to go with airstrikes and help Iraqi troops to regain the cities that are governed now by the insurgents, I think that would help a lot in the short run in forming a new Iraqi government without Maliki, because I think he will take the blame, and at the same time the Americans will gain more leverage in Iraq than they have right now. That will help a lot of moderate Sunnis and Shias to get together. The presence of the Americans has always been very good as moderators when they were in Iraq, when they were involved at the time of George Bush. Now America is sort of away. They don't have a lot of influence, and I think going back with more influence, by playing an active role in this crisis will help a lot.
Jim, in our final moments, a deeper look, political change, how do you see this one playing out?
You know, I don't think it looks very good. You know, I hope Ali is right. It seems to me the odds are against that. These are homegrown problems that the U.S. has very little leverage over. Iraq has to get its house in order. They can't even get a quorum, right? The government is under crisis. It can't even get a quorum to act in the face of extremists marching towards them. So, you know, unless the government, and I agree, having al-Maliki move on would be great, but then who's going to replace him? You know, as someone who's a political scientist, I think a lot of this comes down to politics. Can Iraq get its governance in order? Can it get its house in order? And create a society where it's not just Sunni versus Shia, but where all people are included. They have yet to demonstrate that. I hope they can. But, you know, as of today, I think you have to be a skeptic.
Quickly, I'll let you have the last word.
I agree, it's a homegrown problem, but you cannot solve it without breaking the current equation. We have a situation now where you have people in their positions. They have been there for years, and they have caused what's happening right now. Okay, so saying that the U.S. has no leverage at all in Iraq, I think the U.S. does. The U.S. has for troops. I'm saying for air support, airstrikes, and this will help the U.S. to get back with more influence in the country. Malik is not going to go away without pressure, and no one can pressure him right now with all this sectarian issue going on in the country without someone to actually step in and trying to change the current scene, the political scene. And who's going to replace him? We have a lot of candidates. He was no one when he was chosen back 8 years ago. He was just an MP, and he was just a replacement for former prime minister. We have a lot of candidates. We have people who can actually work more actively and reach out to Sunnis. You have the Hakim people. You have Sadrists people. You have a lot of options there. The issue here is trying to change the basics that we think they are unchangeable. Now we can. It takes a different approach.
The hours and days ahead are extremely difficult. We'll have to leave it there. A deeper look. Adeeb Al-Naimi, former Baghdad bureau chief for the New York Times, and Jim Walsh, research associate at MIT. Gentlemen, good to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next, a rare presidential visit to a Native American reservation. A look at what they call